Well, good afternoon. I had to think a little bit if we were going to play any kind of April Fool's joke on y'all. But I think with the announcements that may come out of the Rose Garden and whatnot else tomorrow, we may not need to. So with all of that in mind, welcome. Thank you for coming today. We're really glad to have y'all here. My name is Gabriel Collins. I'm a researcher here at the Baker Institute, the Center for Energy Studies. My focus is on Eurasia. I do a lot of work with China, Russia, and we're expanding to include India and South Asia as well. And this, discussion that we're going to have here today fits very squarely into that. And it also fits very squarely into core U.S. national interests. I think, if we look over the last few decades, there's always been good dialogue and discussion between the U.S. and India. But I think over the last decade or so, there's been an increasing recognition of just how much both realized value and how much more latent value there is that we can each realize if we continue building this partnership out really on all different levels. There's the trade level, there's the investment level, there's the security level, there's the scientific collaboration level, and then there's the human-to-human level, which everyone here today is really a testament to, and it's millions and millions of those types of relationships that ultimately yield the type of bilateral relationship we'd like. And so, it's great to have you here. It's great to be joined by Consul General and by Mr. Linscott as well. And I think without further ado, so we can get started, CG, if you have remarks, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel. Good evening, everyone. Today, we have gathered here to celebrate the growing partnership between two of the world's oldest democracies, of course, the United States and the Republic of India. At the outset, I would like to thank the Baker Institute Center for Energy Studies, Rice University, and U.S ISPF for partnering and putting up together today's discussion. I'd like to thank Mark Linscott, who needs no introduction, for joining us and for sharing his views on this positive, growing, and important relationship. I would also like to thank all of you, the participants who have joined today. Many of the familiar faces I see. I think it'll be difficult to take everybody's names, but thank you very much for the keen interest you've shown in strengthening this bilateral relationship between both our countries. U.S.-India relationship is a testament to the enduring power of shared values, mutual respect, and vision for a brighter, prosperous future. Over time, this bond has only strengthened, driven by the leadership and the personal connection between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. Their deep and genuine camaraderie is a cornerstone of this relationship. Their first meeting in Washington, D.C. In February was Prime Minister Modi was one of the earliest leaders to be in the White House and have this conversation going on. So it marked a pivotal moment, and we eagerly look forward to their upcoming meeting, which is sometime fall this year for the Quad Summit in Delhi, and we look forward to that. And also, I would like to underscore the Prime Minister Modi's recent appearance on Lex Fridman's podcast, which provided a unique glimpse into the value he places on his relationship with President Trump and the relationship between India and the whole world in the foreign policy aspects, in addition to the domestic policies which he has spoken about. The relationship between the leaders is a relationship built on trust, admiration, and shared commitments to progress, putting their nations in front of everything. So since we are in Houston, I just thought, Texas and Houston also, they play a significant role in our relations. We have a strong energy partnership with Texas and specifically with Houston. We collaborate very closely with NASA. Our astronauts, after a long time, Indian astronauts are going to the International Space Station, and they are being trained currently in Houston. We have institutional collaborations in the education sector with both the major universities in Houston, the University of Houston and the Rice University. Rice has opened a global center in Bangalore last year. We look forward to strengthening these institutional links further. Economic collaboration continues to be a significant pillar of this partnership. Trade between our nations have witnessed remarkable growth. I think, if we look at the numbers, in 2023, it came close to 200 billion, I think 190 plus billion. Last year saw a little bit of a dip in about 130 plus billion bilateral trade, with somewhere around 40 plus trade deficit, or balance of trade favorable to India. And of course, you all know the energy trade forms a substantial part of this goal, this partnership. Both the leaders, when they met, if you have had the chance to glance the bilateral joint statement issued with respect to trade and investment, ambitious target of 500 billion bilateral trade by 2030 has been set as a target by the leaders. This may look at a daunting figure, but it is, I think, both the countries are very positive about achieving this target. On tariffs specifically, I think we will look forward to hear from Mark, what his understanding is. But as a government's representative, I would like to underscore the cooperative and positive engagement which is underway between both the teams. In February, when the Government of India, every year when it comes out with its budget, already the basic custom duties on items like luxury cars, solar cells and machinery have been reduced from its peak import tariff to 70% from 150%, and average tariffs to below 11% from around 13%. Our Commerce and Industry Minister, Minister Piyush Goyal, was in US early last month. He met both USTR, Jamieson Greer, and Commerce Secretary Lutney. The discussions focused on, of course, two things. I think I forgot about the bilateral trade agreement discussions which is going on, other than the 500 billion target. These are the two buzzwords I think both the teams are working on. So this more so because it's been mandated by the leaders. I think the delegation level talks also subsequently happened in New Delhi, and we, of course, we are livid and we understand that the US government may take measures regarding tariff as announced earlier, by tomorrow, which is April 2nd. Irrespective of the measures, we are hopeful both the teams will engage productively to work for the preliminary bilateral trade agreement by fall this year. And as in any negotiations, iterations and making the agreement more comprehensive will continue in the cooperative spirit. We remain optimistic that these conversations will yield positive outcomes, allowing us to share exciting news with all of you very soon. I think I'll stop at that. Our relationships is more than a diplomatic relationship, and we want to build a legacy of cooperation, innovation, and friendship that will benefit the generations to come, and that will benefit the whole world. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
It's all yours.
Well, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by thanking the Baker Institute and Gabe for moderating the discussion today. Certainly, it's a pleasure being here with the Consul General and the government of India in working with U.S ISPF to also help organize this event. Believe it or not, this is my first trip to Houston ever. In my 65 years, I actually shouldn't acknowledge that part of it, but I feel like I've got roots in Houston because my grandfather, my grandpa Judd Mortimer Linscott, was actually born and adopted as a baby in Houston, and adopted by a family in Kansas, and eventually ended up in Nebraska. But we do have those roots here in Houston. I want to pretty much dispense with the preliminaries as quickly as possible because I'm looking forward to the discussion. I know everyone's probably curious, interested to hear about tariffs, and much of the preliminary the preliminary things the Consul General, in fact, already referred to. The value of the U.S. India bilateral trade relationship, roughly $200 billion now, a goal, although it's been a long time goal, of eventually hitting $500 billion in bilateral trade. That's goods and services, not simply goods. The fact that India will soon be the third largest economy in the world, it really is too large for anybody in the United States to ignore. And as a former U.S. trade negotiator, it's been rising rapidly on the bilateral negotiating agenda. And also, there are circumstances, historical circumstances, in which the trade and economic relationship, while it's improved, while it's increased, it's lagged behind the strategic and defense relationship between the two countries. And many of us for a long time have been saying it's really the moment to increase trade and economic integration and better match what we've been seeing on the strategic and defense front. So tariffs, that's what I really want to focus on. And I've got 4 basic points to raise on tariffs, and then we'll get into the discussion and Q's and A's. First, we are currently experiencing, and this goes back to the first Trump administration, was maintained during the Biden administration. Now we see it playing out in the second Trump administration. With respect to tariffs, we are experiencing a period that is not like any other period for roughly the last 75 to 80 years. In fact, it's much more parallel to the situation that existed between the 2 world wars, between roughly the period of the 1920s and the 1930s. At that time, there were a lot of tariff increases. The Smoot-Hawley Act is well known. That was a piece of U.S. legislation from 1930 in which tariffs were raised roughly 20% on 25,000 products. The base was higher at that time. It was a base of 40%, so tariffs were roughly raised to 60%. But other countries raised their tariffs as well. There were retaliatory tariffs. That led to bilateral negotiations, but frankly, a lot of chaos during that period. And some would say that was a contributing factor to the start of World War II. Since then, in fact, right after World War II, creation of a multilateral trade system. Initially it was the GATT for many years, and then the World Trade Organization. And that was a period of relative stability. There were trade spats, and certainly plenty between the United States and India. But it was a period in which the U.S. led the way initially, lowering its tariffs, essentially to help rebuild Europe coming out of World War II. Others followed. Over time, there was progressive liberalization of tariffs and other new rules that were created on trade globally. But in the last 2 decades, there essentially has been no action on continuing to lower tariffs. And in fact, a situation during a so-called round of trade negotiations that essentially lasted 10 plus years before collapsing, the Doha round of negotiations, the larger developing countries, and I'm providing a U.S. perspective here as a former U.S. negotiator, the larger developing countries, and that was China and Brazil and India, really not engaging to lower their tariffs to better match what had been done in the United States and in some other developed countries. And in some respects, that circumstance is the root of the grievances that have been felt and the desire to respond with the raising of U.S. tariffs. So that, I think is just a very important reference point. So what is happening? I was a senior official and assistant USTR during the first 2 years of the first Trump administration. I was a career guy. I worked for many different administrations. And I should note, USTR is a small White House agency. It's cabinet level, but it's part of the executive office of the president. And it has responsibility for negotiating trade agreements for the United States. During the first Trump administration, it was unprecedented in many respects in terms of the scope, the magnitude of raising tariffs. Some viewed it as somewhat chaotic, but in fact it was very deliberate in many respects. It utilized statutes that had been on the books, Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act, Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Act, processes that involved issuing public notifications and having hearings and providing the opportunity for interested stakeholders to comment on the potential for tariffs. And time, basically a period of time between the initiation of a process and actually making a final decision to impose tariffs. In fact, this time around is very different from that time. The authority being used for the most part so far is a different authority. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which does not have a process. Essentially, when a national emergency is declared, there's the ability to impose measures, and in this administration, that's been new tariffs without any delay in implementation. That's been a very important difference this time around compared to the last time around. And another big difference is the magnitude, the scope of what's been announced on tariffs. In the first administration, it was largely China. There were universal tariffs on steel and aluminum, but the heavy burden, the main target was China. This time around, it is much broader. It's potentially universal. We'll find out tomorrow exactly what happens. It could be universal. It certainly is likely to target those countries with which the United States has a trade deficits, countries which have, in fact, much higher tariffs. And India's in that group, but there are many other countries in that group. So that is a big difference from the last time around. And finally, my fourth point, that there are all kinds of scenarios that have been laid out and press reports on some of the implications. Certainly between the United States and India, I'm optimistic. I think this is a moment when the two sides can actually get together, the two governments can get together and do something very important on trade, negotiate an agreement that will give each side preferential access to the other's market, that can promote integration of the two economies, and create a scenario in which the two are working hard going forward in a very special relationship, again, to match what we've seen on the strategic and defense front. So those are my 4 summary points, again, to provide some context for what is happening now. But I really look forward to the discussion and questions from all of you on what's happening.
So if folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll ask you. I mean, these guys, they may not have dealt with me much yet, but they'll learn pretty soon. I have an endless array of questions in my head that I could ask. But I think that being said, like the ones that we'd welcome the most would be from y'all. So, if no one has any to start with, I'll go ahead and ask. But if anyone has any now, okay, we'll just, I'll to keep it fair, I'll move this in a swath across the room. So please, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering where your list of notepads were, but they're in your head.
The list of notes? So
Your questions, but they're probably in your head, right?
They are.
So a quick question for Mark. I read or I saw a clip by President Reagan where he said that he was against tariffs and he thought putting on tariffs causes people in our country to become lazy because the government's protected them. What is your thought on that?
Repeat the question, please.
So to paraphrase the question, President Reagan's views when he was in office is that there's a real risk of putting on tariffs, that it overly protects American workers and makes them lazy and less competitive relative to folks abroad.
Yeah, he may have said that. I'm not aware of that. Tariffs have been around for a long time, and virtually every country applies tariffs to some degree and has for many, many years. I mean, those who have zero tariffs are the likes of Singapore, which doesn't have a manufacturing base, which thrives on trade. International trade is its economy. So I think a country like that is unique in the world in having tariffs. So tariffs are nothing new. The objective of a trade negotiator and trade negotiators for centuries actually has been some degree of give and take, reciprocity, that we will provide access for some products and we get access for products in your market. And that's where we really have had a breakdown in the system that's basically been in place since World War II, in which there was a feeling that there was not reciprocity, there was not fair play in terms of tariffs that were being applied. The United States certainly locked itself into very low tariffs, except for key sensitive sectors. I mean, the dairy industry, the glass industry, there are sugar. There are those sectors that have been very, very sensitive and continue to have high levels of U.S. tariff protection. So, your average economist, most economists would say tariffs are not good for an economy. They curb growth. They curb efficient production among countries. They hurt consumers. But that doesn't necessarily reflect just the hard, cold reality of global relations on trade. And I think that's why we still have tariffs in place. In fact, who knows? And I'm not advocating for any position here. Again, I was a career guy. I worked for many different administrations, Republican and Democrat. But there is a scenario in which U.S. tariffs could even lead to lowering of tariffs in other countries. And in fact, that may be what we are starting to see with the United States and India. The Consul General referred to negotiations last week. In fact, my former deputy led those negotiations for the United States, and my understanding is that they went quite far and were truly groundbreaking, the objective being to lower tariffs. So there will be a period of pain if tariffs are applied. There could be some severe economic consequences. They may not go well, but in some respects, I think we won't know that until it actually plays out.
Question at the top there, please.
Mark, your comments captured perfectly an internal email that's been going around the past couple of days, in which all of the usual economics arguments are made and then everything else gets piled in. So if you could carry your thought one step further, based on your experience, if you don't take a tariff action, or you don't want to contemplate a tariff action, then what does a country in our situation like the United States actually do? What are the other policy levers that people need to think about? Pros, cons.
There aren't many. I was, in fact, most of my career was multilateral. It was Geneva. It was negotiating with countries in Geneva, and there had been high hopes that when the last round of negotiations were launched in 2001, the Doha round, it would lead to there being more of a level playing field with respect to tariffs. And in fact, it didn't play out that way, and the leverage was very, very limited. And for a trade negotiator, leverage is essential. Leverage is precious. And if you don't have leverage, then it's very difficult to accomplish anything. So, I mean, as you know, what are the levers? I mean, there aren't many. Again, plenty of economists would argue, and I think with a lot of justification, that consumers benefit. And that's important, but there are costs to that as well, and that's what we're seeing playing out. And I'll stop there.
Please, sir.
Hi, sir. My name is Duke Vashisht. I run an economic research firm focusing on Quad nations. Post-COVID, sir, the global supply chain was disrupted. My background is aerospace supply chain. The impact was most seen in the aerospace supply chain because of the global nature of it. So when we talk about the $500 billion target that we are trying to achieve, what measures are the tariff regimes going to put, which is going to impact the supply chain, specifically when we talk about things from India in the aerospace? Because right now, if an aircraft has 400,000 parts, only a fraction of them are being sourced from India. So is there a specific tariff regime that is going to impact the aerospace and space supply chain?
Well, certainly increases in tariffs and responses, retaliation could impact that and negatively impact that and potentially reduce trade. But I think part of your question is actually something that should be highlighted, and tariffs are not the only barriers to trade. There are other forms of protection or regulatory action that deter trade, restrict trade, so-called non-tariff barriers. It could be a situation in which a country sets standards, requires that those standards be met, but they don't necessarily reflect global practice, international best practice, and there can be very limited circumstances of being able to test to those standards, and that operates as a barrier to that market. And that's, I think, one priority area for both the United States and India going forward, is that we're not just tackling tariffs, we're tackling non-tariff barriers to see to what extent there can be more seamless trade sector by sector, whether it's aerospace, whether it's agriculture, whether it's services, including digital services. I think that's the aspiration, and fingers crossed. I'm very hopeful. I think this is the moment. I think both sides and the two leaders want this.
Yeah, I think
quite
part
strongly.
of your question is that how far, because the extent of the aerospace industry parts coming here is minimal, so how far it will probably, if I understand correct. So different sectors have different, so we do not know at this time, what kind of measures are being contemplated, we will know. But whether it's sector wise or whether it is overall, and it is, as of now, it is all guesswork, other than the bilateral agreement which is being discussed. But there is some time for that. We hope the preliminary agreement to be in place by fall, but the government's measures will be announced tomorrow, so we'll have to live with that. But there is a difference, and the application of tariffs when we will come to know, we will have to assess that.
I should add to that point, the two sides are structuring the negotiation to come in phases. So there's the immediate, is a tariff deal in place by tomorrow, and might it be avoided, new tariffs avoided for India? That is what is happening over the next, that's what's been happening in the last couple of weeks. And the Consul General referred to the Minister Goyal coming to Washington and meeting with Howard Lutnick and Jameson Greer, who's the USTR, to kind of start the immediate negotiating process. But the next phase, by the fall, when there might be a presidential visit to India, is to take off the next chunk of issues. And I fully expect there will be a phase that follows that these negotiations will spill over into 2026 to do a more comprehensive negotiation. Again, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, services, to see how far we can get as two countries working together.
I think, too, something that's really important to note with this is the difference in the nature of these discussions versus the U.S.-China trade interaction, where non-tariff barriers were just a phenomenal impediment, not just to U.S. firms, to firms from the European Union and Japan and elsewhere, but the fact that these things are being openly addressed and discussed up front, it doesn't automatically promise future results, but it shows a level of good faith that never occurred when we were dealing with the PRC.
And
that's
the
really
China
important.
distinction is really important. And the China distinction, which really started during, the China approach, which really started during the first Trump administration, continued during the Biden administration, I think, reinforced and continuing in this Trump administration, is to decouple as much as possible. We'll see how far that can go, but it's to decouple. I think the circumstances between the United States and India is to see how much more we can couple together as economies. And again, there could be tariffs, new tariffs that are applied, and there, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's pain associated with tariffs, but the objective being to better integrate the economies through breaking down barriers to trade.
And coming not with the premise that by trading more, we somehow change India's internal system. I think that's also a huge difference between what we see unfolding now and what unfolded over the last 25 or 30 years at the PRC. Yes, sir, we have a question.
Softball question. If you
were in the administration, would you be pulling an all-nighter, and what would your advice be? And Consul General, if Trump, President Trump 2.0, is interested in manufacturing coming to the U.S., why is there not a single Indian auto manufacturer setting up shop in the United States?
So maybe I can respond to the first part of that question. The all-nighters already took place. And they took place in Delhi last week with the two teams negotiating. I think the recommendations, the options, and I really think that's what it has been happening over the last 48 hours or so, options being presented to the president, and arguments being made in favor or against those options. So it's at cabinet level now. The negotiators are not staying up all night. They're waiting to hear what the president decides. So I think, yeah, the all-nighters are over for the moment. They will restart soon enough once we do have this action and then the recommencement of negotiations.
On your second part, see, Indian economy is only 75 years young now. So it is obviously, even being the fifth largest economy in the world, where is close to 40 trillion and where is close to 4 plus trillion, despite being. So I myself was in automobile company, two-wheeler manufacturing company. So it is a question of capacity and growth, and we are getting there, and hopefully we will have some of the Indian automobile manufacturing companies in India also. But in other sectors, there are a lot of the U.S. stands as the biggest trading partner and the investment partner and the technology partner, and we look up to U.S. But also the other way around, there are companies, I think over the years close to 40 billion investments has happened in USA, and new industries like solar cell manufacturing, the panel manufacturing, as we speak in Texas, the companies are coming up. We will see more of the two-way investment and trade. That's what the both leaders are talking about when we talk about 500 billion trade. It is growing in that direction. Yeah,
Please.
Mahindra Tractor's assembly plant is in Harris County.
Yes.
And that was Anand Mahindra brought that over well over a decade ago.
Yeah. Yes. There your Judge Ahmed rightly pointed out the Mahindra's presence here.
Yeah, I understand Mahindra's, but there's no auto manufacturing. Mahindra's could set up, as they have, auto manufacturing. If the Chinese can export BYD and whatever.
So the market is in India. I think, we look forward to Teslas in India, and we have to cater to the Indian market, then it will come here.
Well, before we move to the next question, I think another angle of this is if you think about this trade relationship being a greater driver of prosperity and industrial growth, it may be interesting to watch what Indian companies are able to do either solo or in conjunction with American partners in third countries as well. There's multiple angles to this.
Yes, good afternoon. So my question is to the point of the current bilateral trade relations with India and the growth that is being seen there in recent time. The comment was also made that there's the strategic and defense relations with India between the United States has kind of been lagging behind the development of economic relations. And so I was wondering, to what extent is this the prerogative of the current Trump administration moving forward of growing these relations as countries such as China try to get a piece of that pie, so to speak?
Repeat the question, please.
Yes, so he's...
Paraphrase the question.
Okay, if you'll give me that latitude, that license, I'll take it. So he's asking, as we think about the security relationship potentially lagging the U.S. India economic relationship, how does that develop, particularly against the context of competition with China?
Well, in fact, it's the opposite way around. It's the strategic and defense relationship has flourished. It's been growing. It's been a success story, administration to administration, and certainly across the two most recent administrations. And I think that remains an objective going forward to encourage that continuing growth. It's the economic and trade relationship that has lagged. And there's a long history of that. I mean, most of my career was negotiating with India in Geneva, multilaterally, and it was almost never good. I mean, it was really, really difficult with very few successes to show. In fact, we were always on opposite ends of issues, leading opposed groups of countries, engaging in rhetoric that was never very generous towards the other. Bilaterally, I think that's changing now, and frankly, multilateral is just not in the picture. I mean, the WTO has been losing relevance for a very long time. China is already trying to exploit the situation. I mean, that's clear, and that's why I think this negotiation between the U.S. and India is so critical. Its success is critical in terms of that China dynamic. That China would like nothing better than to see a negotiation between the U.S. and India fail, for there to be no agreement, for there to be continuing and increasing tariffs on both sides. I mean, that's China's dream. So to the extent the two sides can be successful, I think is an action that has a China angle to it, definitely.
So far we've been focusing on trade relationship. Talking about investment relationship, is the new policies, trade policies, tariffs, is it likely to have any effect on the investment climate between the two countries?
You want to start, or
Maybe up to you.
I mean, they're related. They are definitely interrelated. So, I mean, you can have situations in which trade barriers actually force investors to go into the market to avoid those trade barriers. So that's one. That can be present in a number of different industries. There are situations in which there aren't particularly trade barriers in a sector. I mean, energy may be a good example of that, where I'm not aware of there being very substantial trade barriers between the two in the energy sector, and I think investment is increasing and thriving. In some respects, the symbolism of a trade agreement, though, can further spur investment in both countries. And there will be provisions in a trade agreement that actually advance investment in terms of fair treatment, fair play, protecting investment in the other economy.
So coupled with the mobility of human resources aspects, which is also being focused, I think, personally, I feel that, it will help each other, the investments, and we see, as I earlier mentioned, we value the U.S. investments in India, and on the other side also, the Indian investments are coming here. I think, this will help each other invest. For example, we know of major energy companies and other companies having the global capability centers in India and investing in India. Similarly, bringing the companies here, manufacturing parts and all, instead of fully importing whichever feeds into the industries, manufacturing here, I think it is going to happen, and it will help this two-way investment.
And I think just a quick before we turn to the next question, there's a set of very common challenges because we've had some discussion today about the differing development levels, but the reality is, especially when we think about energy, particularly electricity and also water issues, there's a greater degree of commonality in our challenges than one might expect at first glance. And I think what that ultimately translates to is a huge, hopefully mutually addressable set of market opportunities. Do you still have a question? I missed your hand earlier.
I'm going to be brave and try to ask something a little outside. There's some notion that the tariffs imposed on China by the Trump administration, the first one, will continue by the Bidens, and the Chinese were able to circumvent them and bypassing them by sending the products to other countries. So question to both of you. Is it feasible to expect a country, and maybe India, such a big trading country, guarantee that that's not going to happen and then that country can get back? Because is it possible we're applying more tariffs to all the world to try to stop that bypassing?
I think there are probably some in the administration there are some in the administration who just like tariffs, regardless of economic impact. They are there. There are, I think, others in the administration that have more nuanced or very different, positions on the value of tariffs. But I think what you lay out is actually one of the reasons why Vietnam is highly under scrutiny, because there appears to be a record of a lot of Chinese products or component products going to Vietnam to avoid tariffs and being assembled there, or Chinese-owned companies going to Vietnam to produce, and everyone's aware of that. And so Vietnam has some splaining to do, basically. I think that will be a dynamic. It's one of the reasons why trade can be. I spent my career in it, so all of us who do that are trade nerds, and it gets very technical. This is not sexy stuff. When you're talking about chicken leg quarters, as something that's a priority in a negotiation, that's not like. That's anyway. There's an area, rules of origin. That is going to be in fact, it's already been a key issue with Canada and Mexico on automobiles, with the new tariffs of which will be imposed of 25%. So what is U.S. produced? What does Canada produce? What does Mexico produced? And calculating that and applying tariffs accordingly. Rules of origin will be important in any new trade agreements that are negotiated, to certainly from a U.S. perspective, that Chinese production is not benefiting from an agreement between the U.S. and India, or an agreement between U.S. and Vietnam, for example.
I think you're raising a good one, and we're actually working on a project looking at Chinese firms' investments in Mexico, and it's some of the trade volumes that go with that. I think rules of origin are key. The other thing with this, and I think if you're coming at this from a Chinese perspective, one of the big fears is not just that the U.S. raises its own tariffs, but that we push our trade partners to harmonize with us. It's a big deal with Mexico. I don't know if this issue's come up at all with India.
I don't think so, but there may be instances where even by paying the tariff or duties here, the companies in US may be sourcing from some of them from China vis-a-vis India. Some of the instances, but I think the Vietnam example doesn't apply to India because of the relationship which we have with China.
And you have a domestic manufacturing constituency that doesn't want to be displaced by things flooding out of the PRC. Up in the top there.
As you focus on the administration focuses on the tariffs, comparing the reciprocal tariffs, is it focusing on the weighted average basis or average basis?
It's a really good question, and there's been a lot of speculation and analysis of that. My guess, but it's an educated guess, is that it's already complicated, and so why complicate more an already complicated situation? So I think they are looking at simple average tariffs instead of trade-weighted averages.
I look at India, around 216 tariff line items. The weighted average is like 9%, whereas the average is 20%. So it's most of the things are not even getting used, the line items. We can say that, hey, because the tariffs are high, nothing is going into India.
And that does happen. But
it does happen. I can understand.
the simple averages, WTO publishes, we know that the Indian simple average of applied tariffs, meaning actual tariffs in place at any moment, is roughly 17%. The U.S. simple average right now is roughly 3.4%. So those are two numbers to work with.
First, a few comments. This lady here asked about, for example, food products of corn, for example, like in Wall Street Journal. Yesterday or day before yesterday, there was comments like if China doesn't buy corn, for example, President Trump is asking India can buy, and there was a, I won't give you a long lecture here, but
we only have about 5 minutes left, so please condense to a quick question. Yeah.
50% of Indian are farmers. So if it is selling corn to India, it is a no-go. It is not going to go anywhere. It's common sense. It goes to me. Okay. Second thing is that this China to Middle East, and China is spending money in investing in Vietnam, those things. That Chinese companies, for example, because of the sanctions, Chinese companies are now going to Middle East and they are setting up their modules there, module fabrication. But my question to you guys is something different, which is that critical minerals is something close to my heart. We have done a very poor job here in critical minerals over the years. If you don't like it, but that's what it is. We have done very, very poor job. And now, what is happening with India and U.S. in terms of getting some critical minerals from India? India is very poor in critical minerals, by the way. But what are the new topics?
I know my answer is to refer to my colleague Sid, and he's here in Houston, so he knows much more about this than I do. So.
I think there is a realization that new and emerging technologies, as well as the critical minerals involved in that, there's a realization that both countries have to collaborate for more. And if under the Quad framework also, this is one of the, it is bilaterally also these ICET, critical and emerging technologies, the critical minerals is also included in that. So there is a realization that, this, especially after the COVID disruption of the, the semiconductors, and which feeds into minerals, which feeds into this sector. I hope we will cooperate further on that.
No, just sorry. We have questions each from the far corners here. We're going to do a lightning round because we're almost out of time here. So if you can quickly ask and you can quickly ask, and then we'll let our folks go for it here. Please.
Okay, great, thank you. As someone who's lived and worked in India, I think this is great to see promoting commercial and geopolitical interests. Same time, someone who's kind of gone through the school at the New Delhi School of Hard Knocks, question is, what are we going to do to prepare American companies, most of which are smaller and don't have a lot of capability for due diligence, to go into an economy that has a different legal system, different contract interpretations, different business practices, and of course there's something called FCPA that the American business have to adhere to. So I'm curious from both sides, how do we prepare American businesses to do what we're talking about here?
Okay, and then quickly yours, and then Bill answer both.
Right, very, very quickly here. So in the 90s, I set up a company in India, and back then tariffs were very easy. There's one factory in the West. one factory in India, bilateral. Nowadays, this company belongs to a very large corporation, and 75% of global trade is with corporations that can manufacture in multiple countries around the world. So if we raise tariffs, that might mean an American company will just manufacture something in Thailand and just skirt around legally these kind of tariffs. Is there a plan how to address this?
Did you have a legal and compliance question too up in the corner there? Because that's what this one is taking the shape.
I did. Mine was a question about, it seems like most of the conversation is about adjusting and coming to equivalent tariffs or fairer tariffs. How much of the conversation is or should be about, is this growing or shrinking the entire global economy and I think, I'd like to hear the thoughts on that, because I think that's really, I would rather have 100%, or I would rather have 50% of a 500 unit pie than 100% of a 100 unit pie. Mm-hmm. And so, what's this doing to the entire growth globally?
It's a really important question, and this is a pretty grand experiment that's taking place. And, I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but I mean, there are scenarios in which new tariffs are applied universally across the board, which is hard to understand. I mean, the Canada situation is hard to understand, frankly. That could lead to retaliation, particularly if there are efforts to negotiate in response and those go nowhere, then there will be retaliatory tariffs. And it's hard to imagine that does not have some negative global economic impacts if that is what happens. If they are used more tactically and to leverage for trade deals, and there are then special relationships that develop, like U.S. and India as a result, that could have a positive impact without the size of that pie declining. And to your question on, it's a really good one on small businesses, and there are many parts of the U.S. government that aren't the trade negotiators. I was a trade negotiator, and I think these parts still exist, that work specifically with small businesses on, and the embassy certainly in Delhi, in fact, does a lot of that. How does a small business break into a market like India? Understanding the laws, the regulations, the requirements, which is difficult in India. I mean, the license raj is not completely dead, but there are parts of and maybe you've had experience with parts of the Commerce Department and the MC and others who, well, maybe not.
The quizzical looks are yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, and I say this as an American lawyer, is we have counterparts in India that probably would be able to help you navigate these types of things in ways that I think, very frankly speaking, would be more effective than a lot of what some of the U.S. government services might be.
But I think the ease of doing business in India, like Mark mentioned about the license Raj, over the decades, I think, after the liberalization, from several thousands regulatory aspects to maybe, several hundreds, maybe only if we count every regulatory aspect, it is only about 400 plus or something now, which used to be 4,000 plus is what, as a generalist understanding I have. So the government the governance reforms is also one of the focus of the government. I think we are slowly trying to that micro and medium small enterprises. There's a ministry which focuses in India, MSME ministry, and they continuously the banking reforms and the credit is one of the important aspects. Some of our Indian friends who do Indian American friends and other American friends who are doing business there, many of them have told me also about still some banking related aspect, getting the collateral, those kinds of things. But the effort is on and it has improved a lot. over the past 2 or 2.5 decades, and I think the efforts are still on that way to minimize those regulatory mechanisms.
Oh, please go.
There was that question, and it goes back to the early responsible origin. I mean, this again, it's not a sexy area of trade, but is this a Chinese product? Is this a Vietnamese product? I mean, having rules that indicate what the true origin based on content of a product is.
You think about some of the firms and research operations we've seen emerge that do really deep diligence work to actually trace origins. I think this is something, to your question, that probably falls in the trust but verify category, where if we're 18 or 24 or 36 months from now and you start noticing these anomalous flows or something that's unusual, then it can be dealt with.
A little bit differently.
Okay.
So a corporation nowadays can produce the same item in 10 different countries. So what do they care if the U.S. puts up tariffs? They'll produce out of Thailand the same article they used to make in America, and they can do it legally, right? Because they already have operations. They don't have to misdeclare a product. With 75% of global trade done by multinational corporations, isn't that subverting any simple tariff project?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I fully understand the question. I mean, if a firm stops producing in the United States and goes to Vietnam, or already has operations and shifts production, then it may be closing off the U.S. market from itself. Perhaps not the rest of the world, but I mean, yes, those calculations will have to be made, and tariffs will affect investment decisions by firms, whether to put more into the operation in Vietnam or Malaysia or India, and less in the United States or in Canada or Mexico. I mean, that's already happening. We're seeing that happen.
So I see the hook being
and unfortunately, I would love to stay behind, but my colleague Nushka and I have got to catch a plane, but we will be back, and look forward to to having the opportunity to talk to everybody and with updated perspectives based on what happens.
Absolutely. No, it's led. Please join me in thanking our panelists. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
No, thank you. No, that's right.